Jesus Christ. Yes, kind of a weird way to start a video about drugs and psychedelics, but I promise it will make sense. Is, even if you don't think he ever existed, even if you don't follow any religion, a super important figure in today's society. And I could try to develop him in this short intro, but I don't really want to lose your attention, so what if I told you that he was actually a mushroom? Okay, I know, please stop throwing rocks. Let's establish some rules right away. This is an informative video in its core. Therefore, I'm not here to tell you to agree or disagree with some ideology. I'm not telling you if you are on the right religion. I'm just here to make you think. Capiche on that? You do you, let's all be friends. And secondly, who was Jesus Christ? Was he a real person? Did he actually exist? Why did I call him a mushroom? Hang on tight, because I just spent the last couple of days researching one of the weirdest and coolest theories I've ever seen. And I will be also discussing a lot of other things. Also in some sections of the video I will have a beard. What now? As you are probably aware, Jesus is and was the most preeminent religious figure in the entire world. It's the face of the biggest religion in today's age. It serves as an idol and even emotional support for millions, if not billions of people across the entire planet. But there is a very important question to ask that sometimes gets overlooked. Did he actually exist? Well, for that, we gotta understand how and what could we do to prove his existence, and for that we can use three ways to prove his existence. Because yes, just believing and accepting that he was a real person doesn't really count as proof. Yeah, I know. Well, one way would be by considering material things. Stuff like bones, a biography, paintings, yes, these ones don't count. Something to hang on to. Thing is, supposedly he was a carpenter, a normal person for most of his life, at least until he started preaching. So having a biography or paintings would be hard, and bones could just be transformed into dust, so getting any physical evidence of this person would be very hard inherently, making the process of proving his existence very hard, because we are only left with the other two things to prove his existence, which is the writings of other people, which yes, has its value when trying to prove his factual existence, but there is a problem with this approach. And what would that be? Well, most writings that depict him were basically written by Christians themselves, from people that already followed that religious cult. For example, the Gospels of the Bible. Those Gospels were written not by Jesus himself, not by the followers of Jesus, but by people who learned the stories from supposed followers of Jesus. They were written by Christians who believed in Christianity, so of course, a problem would arise. It's the biased nature. They could just be writing that off of faith and nothing else, which is a problem. Okay, so what can we do? Are we just supposed to believe that he existed out of thin air without proof? That doesn't seem fair, and it is because it isn't fair. So what historians take in consideration for almost a definitive proof of his existence is writings from people that were not directly linked with Christianity. For example, Jews, which is the third thing to prove his existence. Jews didn't want anything to do with Christianism. They didn't even like it, so it is safe to say that if someone that was a Jew wrote something about Christians and Christianism, it wasn't because they were trying to prolong a faith that they have. They weren't trying to make things up, to make a religion even bigger, because they were Jews. They were only stating those facts because they actually happened, and they were trying to show later generations what happened on that time. It seems fair. For instance, in a book called Antiquities of the Jews, written by Flavius Josephus, a historian Jew in 62 AC, there is a passage referred to as Testimonium Flavianum that reads as follows. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal man amongst us, had commanded him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day. Josephus was a true Jew. He didn't want anything to do with Christianism. So the likelihood of him making things up or writing because he had faith doesn't seem very logical. Why would he want to emphasize another religion besides the one he follows, mainly in an era where religion was the center of everything, the center of society. Everything revolved around religion. Every person wanted to follow the religion that they were in. So things add up to the factual existence of Christ. Now, of course, that this could have been altered by Christians throughout the years. We can't just take that possibility out of the equation. But of course that this is not the only grounded proof that we have. There are a lot of other Roman historians and other Jews that wrote about Jesus that don't have that type of biased nature as Christians have. But this is the most physical we can get. Thing is, today's historians don't take this as the only proof of Christ. There's a fourth thing, actually, which is the culture phenomenon of Christianism. If Jesus Christ didn't exist, that would mean that our society would have been built on a lie, at least most of our today's society. Taking aside the religious aspect and if God exists or whatever, if he never existed, us being here today would have been a huge butterfly effect of one of the biggest lies created by humankind. You know, war, scientific advancements, everything that we have today, even to our morals, would have been built on the biggest lie ever created by humankind. But what if he actually didn't exist? What if he was an illusion to the ones who followed him, and his presence was just passed through society like a collective mania? I mean, he executed impossible feats, he multiplied bread, he transformed water into wine, and he resurrected after 3 days. That seems very, very unlikely and very dreamlike. And again, there are no physical records of him being alive, besides either written by Christians or records that could as well have been changed throughout the time. We have no paintings, no bones, even though he was crucified. And of course, because of that, people would create a lot of theories. And my favorite and the most intriguing one is that it was in fact a damn mushroom. I know. What the hell am I even saying? What did I smoke and what mushrooms did I take? Yes! Let's get into some dirty territory. This theory, if one should call it a theory since we can't even try to prove its reality, comes from an archaeologist named John Marco Allegro, present in his book The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. There he states that Jesus and Christianity actually came from ancient fertility rituals and the use of psychedelic mushrooms, more precisely a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. More on that in a bit, okay? On that book he gives tons of examples and focuses on translation errors between the Aramaic, the language commonly used at the time, and English and today's language, exposing possible misinterpretations. For instance, he says that Jesus, or more precisely Yeshua, the Aramaic term for the word Jesus at the time, was actually a term used for mushroom covered with God's semen. He goes into a lot more detail and he explains his arguments and reasons in his book, but basically Jesus was just an hallucination for that group of cult people, and somehow they would take it as God. That could explain why there are no physical records of the existence of Jesus, there would be no bones because he was an hallucination, and no paintings because why would you paint an hallucination? Actually, there could be some paintings. Oh man. Well, this even links to that mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, having a lot of connections with Christmas and Santa Claus and Christianity itself, as we can see it being depicted in many instances when it comes to those things. This is literally a mini nativity scene that I have in my house, okay? And yes, it was already there, I didn't buy it for this video. Okay, this really seems completely out there, I know. But to make it even crazier, we can start mixing a lot of other ideas with this one, like the work of Brian Muraresco. I think I'm pronouncing it right. An academic that made presence in a lot of podcasts, sharing his points of view on the background of Christianity. So what if, instead of Jesus being a mushroom, something that seems completely out there, he was actually a consumer of mushrooms? In this case, he and his followers. For Brian Muraresco, there's a big chance that past cultures did use psychedelics in a completely normal, free and spontaneous manner. And one way to consume the mushrooms was through wine, something that was thoroughly consumed back in the day. He states that maybe wine wasn't quite like as we understand as wine today. In that case, it had a lot less fermented alcohol, and sometimes it could be spiced with psychedelics and with mushrooms. For example, with psilocybin mushrooms, most commonly known as magic mushrooms, or the one I talked about just now, Amanita muscaria. To foment his ideas, just like John Allegro, he uses some wordplay and possible misinterpretations from past scriptures. For example, wine in ancient Greek was often referred to as a pharmakon. Pharma, a drug, something that could alter our states of mind and that could give us some medicinal use. This, interestingly enough, links to the religious beliefs at the time. Ancient Greece was mostly a polytheistic civilization, meaning that they believed in many gods, opposed to what most people nowadays believe. In general, you know, the all god, the father, the creator, whatever. Well, one of those gods was named Dionysius, and for today's society, he is mostly known and said to be the god of alcohol, since he's linked to partying and stuff, but that is effectively not true. The word alcohol wasn't even in circulation at the time. The word only came to Europe actually in the 900s from the Islamic countries, having its origin from an Islamic word, alcohol. Thus, Dionysius was actually the god of wine, the god of hallucinations and delirium, which makes complete sense if what I explained just now happens to be true. If wine did in fact have psychedelic mushrooms in its composition, it could very strongly be linked to delirium, madness, hallucinations, which could explain why someone would out of nowhere say that he is God and that he is the Son of God, and why a group of people would follow such ideas and such a leader. Linked to Allegro's work, Jesus could in fact have not existed, and a cult of people could have just drank that spiced wine and hallucinate his existence and tell stories about him to other people. Bro, this mushroom shit can even be backed up by paintings of the time, like old ass shit paintings. If this isn't a mushroom, then I don't know what is. Come on, man, if these aren't mushrooms. Anyhow, this again sounds really completely out there, like crazy guy with a tinfoil hat theory, but we do know that mushrooms can produce those types of hallucinations. We do know that mushrooms can alter our states of mind in such a way that we don't know what is real and what is fake, completely messing up with our sense of reality, which leads me to thinking of how do mushrooms, and more precisely, how do psychedelic mushrooms work?
Hello, today I am here to tell you how do psychedelic mushrooms work. Amanita muscaria and psilocybin mushrooms. Please like and follow and do not redeem the gift card.
Okay, I don't know what the hell was that, but anyhow, how does a plant or a fungus or whatever have the probability of literally shaping someone's reality in such a way that they start believing that God exists and that He's the Son of God and He's God Himself, and by the ideas that I presented to literally create almost like a collective illusion of some kind? Let's find out. And yes, I'll be back to tell you if Jesus was an actual mushroom or not, okay? But let's firstly understand how all of this works. Mushrooms, not a plant, okay? Actually, to be fair, we humans are closer to mushrooms than to plants themselves. Just to put it into perspective, we separated from mushrooms 1.5 billion years ago. It would look something like this. Bam, plant, bam, and then we separate here from mushrooms to humans. So we are closer to mushrooms than to plants. And yes, they are their own thing. Mushrooms, just like plants and animals and bacteria, have their own kingdom, the fungi kingdom. So they are one thing apart. They are their own thing, okay? These bros are very important, okay? Understand that? And this is all very cool, sure, but I want to talk about how they work. More precisely, I want to talk about two species of mushrooms and how they work. More precisely, the Amanita muscaria and the psilocybin mushrooms, the two most famous ones, let's all agree. Firstly, psilocybin, or as I previously said, more commonly known as magic mushrooms. One of the probable old spices of the old wine, okay? Well, let's look now into the board/paper, and we are now inside the brain, and these are the neurons. And if you saw my video about coffee, you are already familiarized with my amazing drawings. You should go watch that video, okay? I'm pretty sure you'd like it. So, in the neurons, in some areas of the brain, we find a receptor called the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, a subtype of serotonin receptor. It's on the name. And what is serotonin, you may ask? Well, it's basically a neurotransmitter that regulates mood with the help of other neurotransmitters, such as oxytocin and dopamine. Well, when you ingest psilocybin mushrooms, psilocybin, okay, psilocybin, bam, gets into your system and goes to the liver to be metabolized, and gets metabolized into something called psilocin. I think it's well written. Anyhow, this psilocin essentially interacts with the 5-HT2-way serotonin receptors, attaching itself to them instead of serotonin. It goes there and it places them. Just like coffee and caffeine in the other video, okay? Psilocin goes and attaches itself into those receptors. And instead of having the normal effects of serotonin, like mood regulation, it makes the neurons fire in other ways. And what do I mean by that? Trying to simplify. Instead of the brain patterns going, let's say this way, it goes this way, and it regulates your mood, okay? It fires, boom, mood regulation, boom, mood regulation. What psilocin does is it makes our neurons fire in a bunch of other ways. So this would be serotonin, but instead, when you get psilocin into the neurons, it will fire in completely random patterns. Instead of going this way like it would normally go, it goes this way, or maybe it goes here, 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 here. So instead of regulating our mood in a pre-established brain pattern that our brain recognizes and knows what it means, it makes the neurons fire in a broader, non-regulated way, creating new pathways for the neurons, which leads to a new array of sensations, because you have never felt those patterns on your brain. It's completely new. What our brain does essentially is just recognizing a pattern and reacting accordingly. But since we don't know what these new patterns are, we just start to feel these new feelings. It could even lead to hallucinations because we don't know what these patterns are. Now, this is only one of the mechanisms that makes you trip balls with these mushrooms. Oh yeah, they also act on another system called the default mode network. The default mode network, or DMN for short, DMN, is responsible for essentially controlling your sense of self and your conscious and unconscious reasoning. It links the prefrontal cortex to a bunch of other brain regions, like the area of hearing or of seeing, to effectively make sense of the world around you. Like, you know you are yourself. You feel like you are you, you know that you can hear and see and taste, and that makes you, in some way, you. It basically helps you to rationalize the world around you. You hear because you hear, you see because you see, and those never connect because to rationally experience the world, those types of connections are not needed in the brain. And as I said, they are regulated by the prefrontal cortex. However, when you eat those mushrooms, your brain connections start going in ways that are not your usual patterns, as I previously said. And all those connections get messed up and scrambled. And again, instead of the connections between the neurons going this way, something that our brain knows and it recognizes, it's like they are going to all kinds of ways, which messes up with your sense of reality and even your sense of self. Reasoning gets disrupted. You have no normal patterns anymore for your brain to hang on to. Areas of the brain start speaking with one another, like the ones responsible for hearing or for seeing, and you may even start to feel symptoms of synesthesia, which is essentially you start hearing colors or tasting sounds, because your brain gets all tangled up with new neural connections that have never been made before, and that may even lead you to not feeling like you are you. Everything that you are accustomed to gets scrambled, and your sense of reality and of self is not palpable anymore. You may feel something called the ego death. Of course that not everyone will face these symptoms, but for those who do, it's like there is no more you. Because your you, meaning your brain, or your conscious and unconscious self, has been scrambled around with new neural connections. So, who are you? Really? Are you yourself? Or are you a bunch of neural connections that gives you an illusion of self? This really seems really scary, but once psilocin wears off, everything goes back to normal. And until now, there are no real side effects that we are aware of. No physiological way to get addicted to it, no crash when not on the drug. It seems like a pretty okay thing to use if not overused. And of course I'm not telling you to do it, let me be clear on that. Do not use drugs, do not sue me. Anyway, this is one of the psychedelics that I wanted to mention. A pretty cool one, if I may say, but now let's talk about the other one. What about Amanita muscaria? This is a one that Marco Allegro talks about in his book, and thankfully it's a lot easier to explain. Basically, Amanita muscaria has a compound called muscimol, and this compound essentially attaches itself into something called the GABA-A receptors of the brain. Explanation time. Simplifying your brain has glutamate receptors and GABA receptors. Glutamate receptors lets positively charged ions into the neurons, and GABA receptors lets negatively charged ions into the neurons. And they basically work together to create almost a binary code in the brain. Negative would be for 0 and positive for 1. They work together to almost create a binary code. Well, muscimol attaches itself into the GABA-A receptors, a subtype of GABA receptors, and lets the negatively charged ions in. They go in because muscimol attached into that receptor. And what that does, it basically lets you feel more relaxed and more prone to hallucinations because your neurons are kinda turned off, you know? They are less excited because they have more negatively charged ions in. And that is basically that. In this case, there is no talk about you being yourself and the ego talk and whatever. No, this shit is almost like an anesthesia, okay? Well, it also doesn't really have any negative effects besides some nausea and possible vomitings, but you can't get addicted and all of that shit, okay? You can't even overdose on these. For you to overdose, you need to eat as much as, I don't know, man, you die from eating before dying from intoxication from muscimol, okay? But that makes me think of another topic. These two drugs that I just talked about seem to have minor to no negative effects on your body, at least that we are aware of, and of course if you don't super overuse them. You can't even get addicted, at least not in a physiological way. They also have proved psychological benefits, mainly psilocybin mushrooms, for example treating patients with depression and anxiety, even PTSD. So why are they treated with so much taboo nowadays? Like alcohol works in a very similar way to muscimol, to the Amanita muscaria. It acts on the GABA receptors. Of course that when you eat Amanita muscaria you don't feel social, like with alcohol, and of course Amanita muscaria makes you hallucinate, but their way of working is very similar. And we could say that alcohol is arguably worse because you can get addicted to alcohol in a physiological way because of its action on the reward systems of the brain. You want to feel that dopaminergic effect every time you drink alcohol, and that makes you drink more and more. That makes you go after it, and unfortunately that happens with a lot of drugs. If you get addicted to a drug, you want to follow it. You want to devote your life to it. You don't want to, but you devote your life to it. Nothing matters but the drugs that you are addicted to. You shape your reality around them, doing anything and everything for them. Could drugs be God? Well, thematically in this video we could say that Jesus is God, which by Christianity standards it technically is, or at least he is half God. Well, we could say that mushrooms are God. I'll get to that in a bit, I promise. But what could classify as God? What do humans usually take as God, and what is our relation to him or he or it? Does he exist? Well, this is a very, very subjective topic, but I think that there are some main themes surrounding God's existence. For starters, we could look at God as something to worship, to follow and to devote our lives to, partly in hope to get something better in the future, or just because we got conditioned to do so. If that is the case, we could not only say that maybe the God of Christians and Islam is in fact God, but we could go as far as saying that anything that makes you follow it or devote your life to it could be God. And in that sense, drugs could be God. I mean, if you get addicted to a drug, they become the center of your life. They become God, even if it's just to you. You work for them, you steal for them, and in some extreme cases, you can even kill for them. Just like it happened in the Crusades, for example. Or in, well, some not really pleasant events that may have happened in the year 2001. Anyway, God could just be a type of idea, something so complex for us mere lumps of meat on this floating rock that trying to describe it with waves of sound that leave our flesh bodies in certain frequencies isn't really enough. Maybe we don't even have the vocabulary to understand his existence, if he exists in our understanding of existence at all. Maybe it's just the sum of the laws of the universe and we are way too dumb to understand it. Well, maybe God is reachable via psychedelics. Maybe consciousness and our physical brains are linked to something almost unreachable, and psychedelics are some type of door to get in contact with it and with that faraway realm, tuning us into that shit. Actually, DMT, another type of psychedelic, has been going through research to see if there are relations between people hallucinations, to see if we all hallucinate the same, meaning that we could be entering some type of realm, or if we are just tripping balls. Maybe God just doesn't exist. And since we are controlled by chemicals and electrical signals in the brain, like I explained just now, our brain could in fact make all of this up and give us a sense of purpose just because it is beneficial for our survival. And when met with abnormal quantities of foreign chemicals, we just have hallucinations and we believe it is real, even though it is just a mix in the signals. Maybe he is in fact a humanoid being, a father you can talk to and ask for miracles, and he is up there doing some really important, sacred things like creating life in the universe. Maybe God is just a creator. The creator of everything. Time, space, planets, grass, good vistas, and people. On that case, if God is a creator, maybe we could look at our parents as God, as society as God, since it created our individual personalities, giving us things to hate and love and to fight for. Hell, ultimately we could look at not only Jesus as God, since he is a fundamental persona in the creation of today's society, but we could look at mushrooms as God. In some areas of the world, said by mycologist Paul Stamets, fungi are like the architects of the environments that they live in. They help the plants grow so that they give shades to the mushrooms, and then the plants are eaten by animals and the animals die, ultimately feeding the mushrooms. Now, if the work done by Marco Allegro is in fact true, meaning that Jesus was a collective illusion created by psychedelic mushrooms, or if you want to come a little bit to reality and more into common sense, and we say that the work done by Brian Muraresco is true, and Jesus and his followers were just consumers of wine that happened to be spiced with psychedelic mushrooms, then society could really have been created by mushrooms in a way. Everything that we have today, from our morals to our ideas, to the agglomeration of rocks stacked upon one another that we call cities with pipes and electricity and roads, to the rockets that we have built to reach the stars and beyond, and even the screen that you are using to watch this video right now, could have all been initiated and created by psychedelic mushrooms. They could, in fact, be our God. Well, regardless of whatever your beliefs are, I think one thing we can all agree, which is that we don't have the single bit of clue about any of this. We have no way of knowing, at least not in an objectively scientific way, that we are aware of today. There are the most commonly accepted theories, like the ones that say that Jesus did in fact exist, which yes, may seem a little bit more logical, but the chance of him not existing, or well, even of God not existing at all, or of being everything that exists, of being the past and the future, you know, the sunrise and the sunset, of being your successes and your failures, your decisions, and ultimately you, is as likely as God being a damn psychedelic mushroom. Thanks for watching. Give a chance to this video right here. I bet you'll like it. And peace, Super Mario fanboys.